Good afternoon, everybody, and holiday greetings from all of us at the Mercury Chamber Orchestra. I am Brian Ritter. I am the Executive Director for Mercury, and we're so thrilled you're taking time out to be with us this afternoon for our virtual pre-concert talk featuring Greg Barnett from the Shepherd School at Rice University. We're so excited to present our annual holiday concert this Saturday at 8 p.m. at the Wortham Center. This year, an early American Christmas. And this concert is going to take us on a musical journey starting in Quebec City down the Appalachian Mountains, arriving at the port of New Orleans. And I'm so pleased to turn it over to Greg, who's going to give us some insight about the music that we're going to encounter on this exciting journey from 18th century America. So again, thanks for joining us, and take it away, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Brian, and welcome everyone. As this opening slide that you're looking at shows, I'm specifying French North America. And this is also highlighting my selectivity today. The program is vast. It's not vastly long. It's vast in the sense that it has many pieces. Most of them are quite short, but many pieces from different traditions as well as different peoples, so that I'm actually picking and choosing the threads that I'll be taking up. And the first thing, the first bit of orientation is, well, French North America, exactly what we're talking about in this journey. So to start, I've just got a series of maps to change at least the perspective that I had growing up in American schools of colonial North America. Because by and large, when I thought of colonial North America, or my teachers were teaching it to me, we were talking about the Eastern Seaboard, the English colonies or the British colonies of North America. But if you look at the maps of French claimed territory or French held territory, depending on whose perspective, when you look at the maps, most of North America is French. At the margins, there are the English colonies way off on the Atlantic edge. Then on a different margin is Spanish-held territory, including Florida and New Spain. But the rest of it, the rest of the continent, is pretty much French. And I start with this image because of, well, one Texas connection that just kept coming up in my imagination, which is the French explorer La Salle. He died exploring what is modern-day Texas, attempting to found a French colony in what is modern-day Texas. But he actually thought he was traveling up the Mississippi River. But really where he was much farther west, as you can see. Where they thought the Mississippi River was is about where, Matagorda Bay is, in fact. So that's why he ended up in Texas, and you can see this represented on maps of French North America. But otherwise, what this opening map is showing you is the beginning and the ending parts of the travels that the pieces are sort of mapping out in terms of the musical soundscape that would accompany those travels. But I've got a few more maps. This just to reinforce how large and how central French North America was. In this case, what you see is in red outline, the British colonies. In green outline, the northern part of French territory. And the yellow outline is the southern part. That is Canada, or Canada and the upper Louisiana colony, and then the lower Louisiana colony. All of that is French. And as the maps get more accurate, and this is about the chronological territory that we're dealing with, or at least a point in which you could actually go from Quebec City to New Orleans, because New Orleans is only founded in 1718 to become the capital of the French colony of Louisiane. In any event, what this looks like, there they are. Or more specifically, the journey as it's outlined in terms of the selection of musical pieces begins in Quebec City. It goes upriver, up the St. Lawrence toward the Great Lakes. So I put a second star for that second phase. Then across some of the Great Lakes, probably to the bottom of Lake Michigan, called Lake Illinois in these earlier French maps. And then from there, down the Illinois River to the Mississippi River to New Orleans. That's the journey. But still, what I find so impressive, looking at a map of North America in the first half of the 18th century, is how much of it is French. So my remarks today will pretty much stick with just the French repertory, which is most of the program. But I am excluding a lot of specific pieces, and I'm not going to mention any English tradition beyond this sentence. Instead, the thread that I want to pick up next, after sort of getting a good close look at French North America, the next topic is 18th century religiosity. And really, 18th century religiosity is just a continuation of counter-reformation, reorganization, reaffirmation of the Catholic faith. Just to refresh your memory, the Counter-Reformation officially took place in the middle decades of the 16th century, specifically from the 1540s, 1545, through 1562. Those were the organizational meetings that comprised the Counter-Reformation. So you might be surprised that I'm mentioning the Counter-Reformation in the context of early 18th century French North America. But in fact, both in French North America, as we'll see, and of course in France itself, the activities, the institutions created by the Counter-Reformation are still quite vigorous, very much ongoing. And some of the repertory chosen for the Christmas season is French Noëls. Noëls are sacred music. They're not liturgical music. That is, they do not form a prescribed part of the Catholic Mass or a Vespers ceremony. Instead, they can be used as liturgical add-ons. You can sort of incorporate these pieces into the official liturgy, into formal public worship. But Noëls are mostly associated with personal devotions. And so I'm starting with Noëls to illustrate the strength of Counter-Reformation religiosity, spirituality, and Noëls in particular as a French example, and one that Antoine Plante has well chosen for the Christmas season. The work that you're looking at is mid-16th century. We're right in the period of the beginning of the Counter-Reformation. But it's a volume of Noëls, an anthology of these sacred pieces meant for personal devotions, worshiping on your own time, in private or in the household. And the quote here really captures the spirit of the Noel, a duty of the festivities of the Nativity, of Christmas, preserved by our fathers, continued by us in the most Christian kingdom of France, where we gather in our homes with our families, our wives, our children, our servants, after giving thanks at a meal. Then we pass the time in joyous Christmas carols. And the purpose, I haven't really said much about personal devotion, personal spirituality. But the very last part of this quote gives you an idea of the kind of spiritual guidance offered by the singing of these tunes. We spend our time singing joyous Christmas carols rather than doing something like singing of lascivious songs or passing malicious gossip. These are protectors from our natural inclination toward sin. Then, in terms of the repertory of Noels, this connects another thread of my talk, which is about the transmission of music, just music, not text, but musical tunes. Because we find in the repertory of Noels, and you could make the same argument about the repertory of Lutheran chorales. That is, that the music, the melodies, are drawn from a variety of sources. That is, we have a particular spiritual purpose, and we are ready and quick to come up with poetry to suit that special purpose. Music we draw from a number of different sources. Sometimes we might compose a new tune, but oftentimes a better strategy is to use tunes that people already know and to bend those tunes to this specific spiritual purpose. So what you're looking at is a tune we already know, or rather, if you are a French person exploring the North American continent, much less a Frenchman in native France, your native France, you probably know this tune, Une jeune fillette. And it's a ballad. It's got many strophes of poetry. I've only given you one strophe of poetry just to keep things concentrated, but you get the gist of the story. This is a story about a girl who was forced by her family to become a nun. And this is a theme in folk music of the Renaissance and Baroque eras. That is, a girl who laments her fate, being forced to become a nun, being forced to enter the cloistered environment of the convent. And it reflects a very real bit of history, which is summarized in the term, get ready for it, forced monachization. It is a term. I didn't make it up on the spot. Monachization is to enter into monastic life, a monastery or a convent. Forced monachization is this social phenomenon of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, in which families with not enough means to afford a dowry for a traditional marriage could get what we might call a discount. They would pay a much lesser sum to the Catholic Church, turning their daughter over to the convent. The term for that is a spiritual dowry. If your daughter doesn't agree to this, that's forced monachization. So the paying of a spiritual dowry, which is less money than a traditional dowry, and if that's all you can afford, that is your best choice, unless you're, of course, the girl who does not want to enter the convent. Well, the fact that this situation would give rise to a song, a popular song that you find in different anthologies of popular French tunes, is testimony of the widespread occurrence of forced female monachization. So this is the earliest known collection, 1576, the earliest known collection of popular tunes that has this song. There's the melody, and I'll just play you the tune so that we get it in our ear. You only have to half pay attention because you're going to hear this tune several times over. But here's the tune to Une jeune fillette.
Une jeune fillette de noble cœur, plaisante et joliette de grand valeur, contre son gré, on la réduit en c'est la pointe lui-ette, dont vit en grande douleur. Contre son gré, on l'a réduit c'est la pointe lui-ette, dont vit en grande douleur.
Okay. Except for the fact that this performance changed the first word of the third line from outre to contre, a good performance. It's outre in the original Chant de Voix. Now, that tune is not original to the Chant de Voix 1576. Instead, it's a tune adapted from Italian popular use to French popular use. The Italian form, well, I'm not showing you the music. Instead, to make it more vivid, I'm showing you the portrait of a nun whose name we actually know. But to make it more vivid, I'm showing you a nun instead of the actual music. But you've got the text in Italian, and it's the same story. Not surprising, I argue that this is a widespread phenomenon throughout Catholic Europe. So if in France, so too in Italy. But in fact, as far as we can tell, by the age of the sources that preserve these popular tunes, this tune first emerged in Italy. So let me play it for you. You ought to hear a similarity in the tunes, but not the texts.
Madre, non mi far monaca che non mi voglia far, non mi tagliar la tonaca che non la vuoi portar. Tutte le ancora e l'esprit della messa e la madre d'adessa non fasle non gridar che possa.
Okay, so it is in fact the same tune. Now, for those of you who have read ahead to the program notes, you'll have seen that there is a specific musicological term to describe new text applied to an existing piece of music, and it's contrafactum. It's a compound Latin word because we first see this term. I think we first see this term in the Renaissance. So the term contrafactum, to make against, it gets to the general idea of reusing one thing and applying something new to it. And that's what we have in this case. Une jeune fillette is a contrafactum, a French contrafactum of an Italian tune. Now, by the way, if you're wondering, when am I going to get to spirituality, or at least when am I going to return to it, and the French Noël? Patience. We're getting there. And we're getting there by means of the text itself. Une jeune fillette becomes une jeune pucelle. That is, there was once a young girl, and now we have a young maid with a noble heart. And that young maid with a noble heart, well, let me go to the source, one of the sources that preserves this new bit of text. The new bit of text, une jeune pucelle, instead of une jeune fillette, is found in a number of different anthologies of spiritual songs, or in this case, you can see the title from the 1699 collection, La Grande Bible de Noël, the large or the great Bible of Noëls, old ones as well as new ones. This would have been one of the older ones by the time of this publication in Paris, 1699. But what I want you to take in is how rhyme scheme, meter, that is syllable count, line by line, is preserved in this new version, going from une jeune fillette to une jeune pucelle. But more profoundly, we've changed a secular folk song or a popular secular song to a popular sacred song, one useful for spiritual affirmation, spiritual guidance, to keep us from the harms of sin. So there it is in the text, and I'll play this piece for you. But really, now for the third time, as far as the music is concerned, I'm playing the same piece. It's just always the same piece, but with different texts. Here goes.
Une jeune pucelle de noble cœur, priant dans sa chambre de son Créateur, l'ange du ciel descendant sur la terre lui conta le mystère de notre Salvateur.
Now, I've included the third stanza or the third strophe so that we're able to identify who this young maid is. This is now the story of the Annunciation. The young maid is not just some girl forced into a convent. It's Mary. It's the Blessed Virgin Mary, and this is the story of the Annunciation. Now, the prescription is very specific in this collection because this collection is nothing but contrafacta, that is, new words added or imposed upon old melodies, so that there are no melodies necessary in this collection. Instead, there's a set of instructions. The set of instruction at the instruction at the top says, okay, another Noel. This one to be sung on to the song Une jeune fillette. So then you know the tune, because everybody knows the tune. You know the tune, you plug that in with these words, and presto, you have a Noel. You have one of the Noels that's featured on this program. Now, I don't want to play too much music from the actual program while I'm trying to tell the story of the music. So that's about as close as we'll get. But otherwise, to continue the story of the music, that is, pieces you might hear on a journey around Christmas in French North America, how these pieces demonstrate different forms of musical transmission, or specifically how a melody can be transmitted, not just from place to place, but from function to function, from secular function to sacred function. Continuing that idea of musical transmission, the specific transmission that these two recordings illustrate is a transmission from popular or folk tradition, what some music historians describe as the vernacular instead of the folk tradition, just the vernacular tradition. How this same tune will originate in that vernacular or folk tradition, but then become incorporated into or woven into a more cultivated or exclusive or even courtly tradition. So the two pieces that I have to play for you, one is an early 17th century harmonization of this same melody that we've been hearing. The other is a mid-18th century organ, and I should say organ contrapuntal arrangement, but it's always the same tune. But this same tune is now being taken up into a more sophisticated or intricate or cultivated tradition of composition. Here goes. First, the harmonization. Okay. Then, an arrangement for organ from the mid-18th century. And what this organ version amounts to is a series of contrapuntal variations. And when I say contrapuntal, what I mean specifically is that the original melody is a single line of music. If you read music, it would be represented by a single staff and the notes on that staff, a single line. The contrapuntal elaboration combines different lines or adds different lines to that original one. And one of the challenges, one of the aspects of Michel Courette's sophisticated treatment is that the additional lines are all rhythmically and melodically independent of that first line. That is, they're different, the contrast, so that we hear a series of independent lines that work nicely together, or that work nicely with that original line, but also set it into high relief. Now, having said that, the cultivated treatments, arrangements, or compositions based on popular melodies is an avenue that I don't want to pursue any further. And I say that with some fervor because it is a bottomless pit of 16th, 17th, 18th century composition that is extracting out settings in counterpoint, in imitative polyphony, settings of these tunes. We could go on all day listening to the various treatments by composers of those centuries. Instead, I want to stick with the main thread of sacred devotions using tunes originally borrowed out of popular folk tradition. And this is my last stop with this particular tune, because at least in my family, the only music they had heard of is the piece that you're about to hear. It's popularly known as the Huron Carol. What it represents is a further use of the only tune I've been playing for you today, a further use of that same tune, somewhat altered. The music will sound different, but it is a further version of the same tune that we've been listening to, but now setting a text in the Huron language. And you're looking at the original Huron and an English translation. The person to whom this contrafactum is attributed is the Jesuit missionary Jean Brebeuf. He ultimately, maybe within 10 years of making this arrangement, he was martyred by Iroquois, by the Iroquois, not the Hurons. But this piece was created as part of his missionary activities as a Jesuit missionary in 17th century North America, or in 17th century Nouvelle France. So I'll play this piece for you. And then if you're curious, we'll go back to an earlier version to see if you can hear the relationship between this Huron version and the earlier forms. But here goes. Now, in case you're just flummoxed and you hear no relationship between this piece and the melodies that I've been playing beforehand, well, let me just remind you how those melodies go. I only need to go back 2 slides. Let me remind you what un jeune pucelle sounds like.
Une jeune pucelle de noble cœur, priant à sa chambrette son créateur.
Okay, that was just the opening phrase, heard twice. Now let me play the Huron Carol a second time. Okay, that was the equivalent amount. Now, if I were to explain it specifically, what the relationship is, or what transformation to the melody has been effected in creating this arrangement, or this version of it. It's not even an arrangement, it's just another contrafactum. The rhythm has been straightened out, and that's not a technical term. What I mean is, in the Huron version, it's a simpler rhythm. Bum, 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 bum. Just equal durations, equal notes, a simplified rhythm, compared to the original folk tune, dum bum ba bum 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 ba bum bum there's what's called a dotted rhythm in there by musicians. It's not complex, it's just a little more complex than the version you got here. And the other thing is, well, the melody, the notes, the pitches aren't identical to the previous versions. Instead, what you have is a kind of genetic relationship, as if we were looking at siblings who have similar characteristics, but they're not identical. In this case, the way I would explain it in terms of the melody is to think of a melody as a shape. That is, it goes up, it goes down, it goes up again, then maybe it stays down. If you imagine the course of the pitches as forming a shape, the shape is the same. The exact pitches are not the same, but the overall shape of the melody is the same here as it's been throughout the tunes that I've been playing for you. For me, this is the most interesting, at least to try to explain, because the music is changed in this case. And the first examples, going from Italy to the secular French, to the sacred French, the melody was so faithfully preserved that there wasn't really much to say about the transmission of music and how it can, in a sort of whisper down the lane fashion, how the transmitting can alter the music itself. But here we see the music being altered by this process of transmission, going from France to New France, from the French to the Huron. Now, the last thing that I want to say, and I can do it very quickly, is to point out that this tradition of generating musical repertory to serve the purpose of personal devotion, personal spirituality, or to serve the purpose of missionary work. But this larger process of generating musical repertory to serve this religious purpose is ongoing in the period that we're talking about. And here I'm going to use a piece that does not appear on the program to illustrate my point about this ongoing tradition of creating musical repertory for this devotional spiritual purpose. What you're looking at is the title page to a collection of secular French cantatas. The French cantata is a sort of new and very popular genre in the first decades of the 18th century. And the yellow text is taken from one of the cantatas in this collection. The composer is André Comprat, and specifically, the music of that text is there on the left-hand side. Now, the music isn't so important. Rather, we'll hear the piece, but rather it's the contrafactum activity that is ongoing in the 18th century that is important. Because if we go to the 1730s, that is just a couple decades after Comprat's French cantata, if we go to the 1730s, we find a series of volumes under the title Nouvelle Poésie Spirituelle, new spiritual and moral poetry, used with the most beautiful tunes. That is, tunes taken from anywhere, but now adapted to spiritual poetry. And now in yellow bold, you have the new poetry added to that tune by Comprat. Now, there's something further here. This is the music from that collection of spiritual poems. It's the same music. If you don't read music, you just have to take my word for it. It's the same tune, new sacred text. But to get us as close as possible to the program that you'll be hearing without playing any of its music, The final section of the program is pieces drawn from a manuscript from the 18th century that has been preserved for centuries in an Ursuline convent in New Orleans. This is that manuscript, or you're looking at the incomplete title page to that manuscript. The complete title page probably would have had a title written in there somewhere. But my interest lies in one of the tunes in that manuscript. It's the same tune. This manuscript is a faithful copy of 4 of those volumes of spiritual poetry that had come out in the 1730s. And in fact, this manuscript was created in the same decade, 1736. For those of you who do read music, just one on top of the other, the original compras, then the published spiritual version, then the manuscript version in New Orleans. I only have a recording of the compras, but you can, if you like, look at the lower 4 lines, the contrafactum text, because they're designed to fit rhyme scheme, meter, with the music of compras. Here goes. So in your minds, you can just substitute those lower 4 lines for what you were just hearing, and there you have it. A tune useful for your spiritual devotions. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Greg, for your fantastic insights into Saturday's concert. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. We can't wait to see you on Saturday, whether that's in person down at the Wortham Center for a socially distanced concert in the Brown Theater, or whether that's from the comfort of your very own living room, streaming the concert live for yourself to enjoy. So thanks again, everybody. We look forward to seeing you next time, and have a great afternoon and a wonderful holiday season ahead. We'll see you soon.